After being shot by Cassian, Orson Krennic, the Advanced Weapons Research Director and visionary of the Death Star, was rendered incapacitated at the top of the Citadel Tower on Scarif. As depicted in the film Rogue One, Krennic could do nothing but watch as his creation, the battle station that he dedicated decades of his life to, fired upon Scarif and obliterated him in the process. Thanks to the Rogue One novelization and a short story within From a Certain Point of View, we know exactly what Krennic's final thoughts were as he came to recognize that he lost control of the project he considered to be his, and that he would not survive his journey to Scarif. In this video expose, I will describe Director Krennic's final thoughts before his death upon Scarif. Krennic's thoughts, or at least the focus of them, are quite different as they're presented in the two materials. So let's start with the short story entitled On the Verge of Greatness. The short story makes it clear that in his final moments, while looking up at the looming presence of the Death Star above Scarif, Krennic could not help but to turn his thoughts to Grand Moff Tarkin, and more specifically, his hatred for his longtime rival. Recognizing that Tarkin had taken control of the Death Star, Krennic immediately understood that the battle station would be a disaster in the hands of the Grand Moff, rather than within his own. This is because, unlike himself, Tarkin didn't know the true power upon which he stood. Not only that, but Tarkin wasn't an engineer, but a politician. Unlike himself, who having just discovered from Jyn Erso on the Citadel Tower that her father had sabotaged the Death Star, would have immediately taken the battle station offline to review the entire schematics and examine every bolt, he knew Tarkin wouldn't do the same. Lying in agony, Krennic recognized that Tarkin would be impatient and would want to demonstrate the full power of the Death Star as soon as possible. Because he knew that Tarkin wasn't the architect of the battle station and couldn't fathom the complexity of the weapon he created, Krennic knew that ultimately, Tarkin would never find the flaw implemented by Galen Erso. Therefore, as shown within the short story On the Verge of Greatness, Krennic's final thoughts on Scarif were those recognizing that while Tarkin may have finally succeeded in getting rid of him, ultimately, Krennic took satisfaction in the fact that his Death Star would ultimately be Tarkin's undoing as well. The Rogue One novelization is interesting as it gives an entirely different perspective regarding Krennic's final thoughts on Scarif. There are certainly some similarities with the elements in the short story within From a Certain Point of View, such as Krennic's final thoughts turning to his struggle against Tarkin, and his fury for having finally been undone by the Grand Moff. But there's one key difference that exists within the novelization that wasn't seen within the short story. Krennic actually figures out the exact way in which Galen Erso sabotaged the Death Star. Therefore, while the short story makes it clear that events would have proceeded differently following Rogue One, since Krennic would have taken the battle station offline to determine what the flaw was, the novelization demonstrates that had Krennic survived the Battle of Scarif, the Empire would have very likely fixed the defect created by Galen before the rebellion could have had a chance to take advantage of it. Krennic discovered the flaw by doing two things: replaying the dire warning just given to him by Jyn, and envisioning the entire schematics of the Death Star as it sprang to life above him, since as the novelization puts it, they were etched within his heart. As Krennic envisioned the vast energies building within the kyber crystal core of the weapon within his final moments, he immediately discovered the flaw. It was described as a detail that Krennic had simply overlooked, a trivial adjustment made by Galen, which was so small that he'd previously forgotten it altogether. As he lay atop the Citadel Tower on Scarif, Krennic saw exactly how the rebels could take advantage of the Death Star. He saw the single exhaust port leading from a narrow trench traveling down kilometers to the main reactor. Therefore, in the novelization, Krennic's final thoughts on Scarif showed that he was the only one in the galaxy who knew the weakness built into the Death Star by Galen. But all he could do was seethe in fury as his creation obliterated him at the top of the Citadel Tower. So there we have it, Director Krennic's final thoughts before his death as seen within the Rogue One novelization and in the short story within From a Certain Point of View. We love making these videos, so why not subscribe for more fun Star Wars theories and discussions? Also, if you enjoyed the video, think about giving a like or leaving a comment. Or perhaps follow us on Twitter at SW Reading Club for updates regarding the channel. Or support the channel through Patreon for access to exclusive hangouts and book discussions. If not for me, for understanding his fury.